Hi, everyone. My name is Bibi Yasmin-Katsev, and I'm the Executive Director of the District Charter Alliance. Thank you for joining our DCA mini webinar series. This is the last of the three that we were hosting, and this particular topic covers model policies for partnerships. The Model Policies for Partnerships webinar is intended to provide viewers with an overview of topics related to in-district charter policies, including best practices for when partners should establish new policies, adopt the district's policies, or figure out what's the best option for them. Today we have three amazing panelists who are, in my opinion, experts in adopting these model policies. And if you have any questions for them, there will be time at the end where we can ask them. And if there's something that you realize, oh, I really wanted to ask them, feel free to get in contact with us and we'll relay that question for them. And if there's a question we cannot answer today, we will find the answer for you and give it to you. So let me go ahead and introduce who I have. Our first panelist is Christy Martin. She's an attorney and policy expert with the District Charter Alliance. Her expertise focuses on system improvements in public education. She currently advises state and national foundations and stakeholder organizations, including the District Charter Alliance, regarding opportunities to drastically improve student outcomes and achievements via district portfolio management structures, alternative education delivery platforms, district charter partnerships, strategic compensation, focused on governance, and better data sharing processes. So thank you, Christy, for joining us today. In addition, I have Matt Matera, and he is a partner of the nonprofit Empower Schools, where he works to build systems that empower educators to lead student success. He began his career as a middle school English teacher for 5 years and has a BA in English and a JD. So thank you, Matt, for joining us. And I believe we have also other people from the Empower Schools team. So thank you all for your support. Last but not least, we have Karen Weisinger. She is now in her 3rd year as a school action fund provider. My consultant, Kara Weisinger, has supported over 20 Texas school districts and operating partners to plan and implement school actions, mainly focused on AT&T partnerships. Currently, Karen is also a member of the SGS executive advising firm, Diversa, which is leading the annual portfolio planning process with Beaumont ISD and Galveston ISD. Her most recent job prior to Maya Consulting was a founding elementary school principal in Austin, Texas. Karen began her career teaching middle school language arts. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Just give me 1 second while I navigate that.
I knew there was a reason Karen and I got along, and it's that middle school language arts connection.
That's right, Matt.
And I'm super impressed in general because middle school, wow.
Yeah, they're agreed.
Special.
Sorry. Okay, does everyone see my screens? Thumbs up? Yes. Okay. So the goals of today's session is really a shared understanding of the purposes of operator board policies. Just be very clear, every district has their own set of policies that they adopt that impact their students and their teachers. When a school district goes into a district charter partnership, one of the main pieces of autonomy is allowing the in-district charter to adopt their own policies, not necessarily adopt the policies of the district. Now, at times, it may be appropriate to adopt the district charter, the district's policies, but in order to ensure autonomy, we really need to think about the in-district charter adopting their own policies. We're also going to be identifying policy areas that may warrant customization and map out different policy development approaches your organization can take, and most importantly, provide feedback on model policies. The District Charter Alliance is really excited to announce, alongside Empower Schools work, we have created, I would say, like a skeleton approach of these are the model policies we recommend you adopt or consider adopting. Granted, it's only a recommendation, don't have to take it. And they will be available on our website in the next week. And this has been the work of Christy Martin and Empower Schools together. So we'd like to give a huge thank you to the teamwork there. And we're going to go into explaining that little effort a little bit at the end of our session. Now it's not moving. There we go. So why policies matter? I'm going to shift gears and let our panelists explain it, and give the floor to Christy to go for it.
Sure. Hi, everybody. Good morning. Please, we want this to be informal, so jump in at any point, and certainly Matt and Karen, if please share your thoughts as well. So we think there are at least 4 reasons why it's important that district partners have their own comprehensive set of policies. And first, it is to, and Karen has put this really well in the past, it's one of the main mechanisms that an operating partner has to operationalize their autonomy. So you can theoretically, operating partners, and even in the performance contract, have autonomy, but what does that look like in the actual school day, in the implementation of your model? And policies are a good way to get down on paper your organization's shared understanding of what that autonomy means for the work that you do. Second, it closely tied to the first, this is already since we're all pioneers here, already a pretty ambiguous context. And so the more we can do to clarify, and there's nothing like having to write something down and have your board vote on it to get you to clarify what your intent is with respect to, personnel management or budget adoption or budget amendments, and how what the steps are that should take place to carry out the board's will and the implementation of your model. And then I just want to remind everybody that in most instances, the operating partner is a nonprofit that has received tax exempt status from the IRS. And there are laws both from the Texas Business Corporations Act and from the IRS that require the board of a nonprofit to actively manage the activities of the nonprofit. And the tool that boards use to establish their oversight are policies, just like with school district boards. The way that they express their governing role is to adopt policies. And so your board members, whether they realize it or not at this moment, really do have a legal responsibility to ensure that there are policies in place by which they are managing, or I should say governing, the activities of the nonprofit. And then finally, policies are important because they provide a defense against lawsuits, just to put it crudely. If you don't have a policy then in place, for instance, on a particular personnel issue, let's say how you're going to implement the Family Medical Leave Act, just as an example. And it's handled informally, and sometimes Joan got extra weeks for maternity leave, but Elizabeth did not. Then you're in some risky territory by treating your employees differently. So you want to. It's very much in your interest to have policies addressing personnel, finance. We'll get to health and safety a little, not in this first tranche of policies that we'll be sharing, but we'll get to them. And then related to that is reputational risk. we're already kind of an edgy little group here, and we want to keep building our institutional credibility. And one way to do that is to behave like what the well-organized operators that I know you all are. And one piece of evidence of that sort of for credibility's sake is to have a fully developed policy set. And I would just want to take a moment to say, in my view, even when it makes sense to opt into a district policy, you ought to have a policy of your own policy that lists the policies you're opting into, and the executive officer should ensure that there are operating procedures laying out, hopefully jointly developed with the district, laying out how the district's policies will work in the context of the partnership, because it's always going to be a little bit different. And you want to have taken that step and make sure everyone is on the same page about how even district policies are going to play out with your school or school system.
Thank you, Christy. Do you mind if I go to the next slide,
Oh,
or?
no, sorry, I should prompt you. Yes, please.
There we go. So connecting to the partnerships and operators context, what is one policy area where partners and districts need to be aligned on? And I don't know if that question is specifically for Christy, or if Matt and Karen can include some feedback.
I can jump in there, BB. This comes from my, I was joking with Christy and Karen when we were prepping for this, that I still think through a classroom lens and trying to make the sessions interactive whenever I'm doing any kind of presentation. So actually the question is not for Christy or for me, it's actually for everyone in the group to think about. I'm just curious as sort of like to spark your thinking. And, you know, nobody has to share, but I wonder if you could just take a minute to think about what's a policy area in your specific context where you think it would be really helpful to have districts and partners have the same policies, and what's an area where you think it's important for partners to have different policies than the district, or the flexibility to adopt different policies if they want to. So I'll give you like and sorry, I forgot to say anything introductory, but it's such a pleasure to be here with everyone today. I know it's a week right before holiday breaks start and everything. And so thank you for joining us, and please hold Christy and Karen and me accountable for making this as useful as possible. So we really welcome your live feedback. We would much prefer you say right now, hey Matt, that's not helpful, than when you log off, say, boy, what the heck was that Matt guy going on about? That was really not useful. So please, please don't hesitate to give live feedback.
And I added
Seth, because you're my friends, you know, you have to be nice. You're my work colleagues. No, just kidding. But yeah, if you could take just a minute and think about what's one area where you think it's helpful for the district and the partner to be aligned, and what's one area where you think it's helpful to have flexibility to be different.
I just want to say I did out of the screen just so we can all see each other's faces. And like Matt said, don't be afraid to share.
We have a little prompt over here in the chat, so if you forget what the question is.
Yeah, feel free to answer. And I think I'll go meta. Oh, it's helpful. So thank you, Virginia, for sharing. Interesting. And I think the reason I think it's important to ask these questions ties back into what Christy was saying, that before you can really engage deeply with the model set of policies that will be coming or with the existing policies, sort of the first question is to make sure you understand what your goal is with policies, right? I think it's really easy sometimes to kind of let the tail wag the dog on something like policies, where you're used to having you know that you have to have policies, and there's this existing framework that is used in Texas, and so you sort of go through policy by policy. But I think it's really important to start and think, like, what are we trying to accomplish? Like, where do we want to be the same? What do we want these partners to, these policies to do? So I think Chrissy's categories are helpful there, that, you know, in terms of like, what are you trying to accomplish? How are you making sure you're fulfilling your fiduciary responsibilities? How are you protecting yourself from liability, or, you know, showing to the world that even as a pioneer that you're being thoughtful and caring about your school community. But you know, I think then from there going in and thinking the next step then, once you do that. So I'm just going to cherry pick a couple of things where people are saying things. So like, you know, here a different one is policies around testing and benchmarks, for example. Like, now you know, okay, well, we're going to be different, so let's be really clear about like what our policies are, what the district's policies are, and what does it mean that they're different, right? So like, what does that mean in terms of how we're operating to make that real, and so it's not just a policy, right? And what does it mean that it you know, Alex is saying we need to make sure that HR is aligned. What does that mean to have HR aligned? What does that mean for your coordination with the district, between the district HR and the partner HR? And so I think that one way that we sometimes overlook, I think, when thinking about politics, is that it should policies, pardon me, not politics, is that you can tell I read too much news. No, but when you think about policies, is how does this then change the way we interact between the district and the partner, and the way that we then we interact, and then the way that we take actions. And I'd love to hear people's thoughts, reactions, disagreements. Maybe I'll ask Karen. We've been unfairly silencing you so far, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, where you agree or would push, and then Christy, of course, too, and then curious what the group thinks.
Yeah, well, just to add on to what you're sharing, Matt, and to build off of the DCA session yesterday around performance contracts, and I was in my car driving, but I believe it was David Sines from Fort Worth that was sharing. Is that okay? And he was talking about how, you know, there are some districts that are involved in these 1882 partnerships that really approach this process coming with their own list of non-negotiables as a district. And then there are also partners that engage in this work initially that have in their mind, these are my list of non-negotiables. And so I feel as almost a prerequisite to trying to determine which policies should be aligned, which ones need to be different. Really, the first conversation that the district and the partner need to have is around what are those non-negotiable areas, and then areas of flexibility when it comes to this partnership. So for example, is it going to be a non-negotiable that the district employ the staff? And if so, is it a non-negotiable that they also adopt some of these HR policies? Because we have to remember that at the end of the day, it's the district that is the authorizer. And when it comes to approving benefits and 1882 law, there, you know, with TA, there aren't any necessarily requirements when it comes to who has to adopt what. So it's really a district. The district can really drive that conversation, but then it's also recommended that the partner come to, and knowing you know, where are the areas that we really want to have our own policies around staffing and with teachers, around student code of conduct. And I think that my recommendation would be, this is where both districts and partners, if you're new to this and this is the first partnership that you're getting into, to really reach out and use other districts, use other partners that have been through this process before, because I guarantee you that any district or any partner you talk to, they're going to say, well, if I only knew this before the first time that I negotiated a contract, I would have done it this way. And so it's super helpful to get that perspective from districts and partners who have already gone through this at least one time. So now, Matt, did we want to see, does anybody else want to share? Anybody that said anything in the chat or wanted to ask a question? Or...
I'm going to ask Lindsay to ask her question that she posted privately. So please share your example, Lindsay.
Yeah, thank you. So, you know, a TEA, nobody wants TEA to take up all the airtime, but thank you, DCA, for inviting me to listen in today.
Lindsay.
I appreciate your
I will wear that badge of honor on my heart. So one thing that comes to mind is a conflict that we had come up in a district this current school year, where you know, a partner had agreed to follow a large number of district board policies. And they also have, you know, our sort of like required statement in the contract of the partner has sole autonomy over, you know, teacher staffing assignments and hiring and evaluation and all that kind of good stuff. And so when the partner wanted to do something different with regards to how they assigned teachers, so the district policy basically, you know, handled teacher assignment based on seniority. The partner wanted to do something different. And so they approached the district and said, well, okay, we've got autonomy over this, so we're going to do something different. The district said, well, our contract says that, you know, you have autonomy, but you're following this policy. And so the takeaway there is I think really, as operating partners, to be as sort of thorough in that policy review as possible, and to try to like put yourself in a situation. So like, all right, this policy sounds good to me right now, you know, when we are all working together to try to build a partnership, but like, let's think about what happens if a bad scenario comes up, right? Like, not to be negative, but let's try to like figure out like, what would it look like if, you know, 3 years down the road, we want to do something different. You know, I think that would have really helped this partner in that district get to a place where they could like sort of have that hammered out better in the performance contract. Because I think what everybody felt like at the end of the day was that the contract was in conflict. And the contract really wasn't, right? It was just that their needs and their wants were in conflict. So really being careful about those board policies and being really critical in your review of those policies, I think is like #1 best thing that you can do.
Thank you, Lindsay. Appreciate your bravery.
I'm curious if anyone else has reflections or questions on this. Examples of times that you either were helped out by having clarity on this or wish that you'd had more clarity. Okay, well, I'm not gonna, I'm generally a pretty relentless cold caller, but I don't think this is the right forum for that. If anyone would like to add anything at any time, please feel free to. And Christy, did you want to say something? Or?
Yeah, I think a couple of, just in the chats, there are a couple different examples that I know we've struggled with. So purchasing is one, right? So what are the, what requirements of the district with respect to competitive bidding with federal grant funds flow down to the operator? The more we could get that spelled out in the operating policies, the better. I think a lot less hair would be pulled. And scheduling is another example that folks have mentioned, and assessment. So those are all, I think, and I don't know if anybody wants to offer any challenges they've run into on those particular topics, but it sounds like now that we're 3 years into this, folks are like, the good news is we're starting to get sort of some common sets of issues to work on together are rising.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Arista Owens-McGowan. I'm with Fort Worth ISD in the Office of Innovation. I will just say, Christy, I know when David Sines and I both started in this department, the partnership had already kind of started with Texas Wesleyan, so we both were new to it all. But as we have worked together, we did find with purchasing that there are some things that they really need to purchase that are high amounts. And typically you go through, you know, the whole process and board approval and all that good stuff. And you have to get the signature of the chiefs and all of that. And so those were some things that we had to go back and look at and do some addendums to, because, you know, we said that the senior officer there should be able to go ahead and approve that and just move forward without going through the entire, you know, chain like we have to in the district. And so those are just some areas that we did have to look at. And so once a couple of those situations came up, everybody just kind of sat down and looked at all of them, like, okay, what else could possibly be a situation?
Yeah.
Just did some addendums to those, you know, to that process. And so right now what we have is that the Leadership Academy Network does follow purchasing policy, but in certain areas, certain dollar amounts, the senior officer there, Ms. Billy, can approve those things and just move forward. Like, she doesn't have to go through all the other channels. She can approve those things and just and move on. And so there are a number of things like that that we looked at that we did do addendums. So just wanted to add that, you know, something just to think about.
That's really helpful as sort of a hybrid of opting into district policies, but then tweaking it a little bit so that it works well for everybody.
Well, this is Tracy. I wondered, I saw a lot in here on kind of HR and, you know, and staffing, and I wondered, is there a way to, you know, to have alignment and yet also, you know, not stop sort of flexibilities or innovations that might come from partners? So, I mean, it's not kind of doing what the district has always done. I want to make sure that we're, you know, as a communications person, I don't want horrible stories coming out, obviously, but I also don't want to limit the fact that the partnership might actually come up with something that, you know, teachers or, you know, or just educators in general might actually be better and might be something that the district could ultimately adopt. I mean, something that they could learn. So I don't know whether there's room in the policies to have, you know, have some flexibility in that area.
Hi, this is Alex with Seltzer with the Leadership Academy Network, and that's something that, you know, being new to my role with the Leadership Academy Network, that's something in particular that we're working on. Ms. Young, you're referencing, so I do have a background in staffing, so I'm familiar with the district policies in that area. However, when I think about what opportunities there are for our group and maybe other district charter schools, I think looking at overall staffing procedures and strategy. So I think about, you know, every year you're going to have to hire, you're going to have to surplus, you're going to have to level. And so there are things that our area and our organization can do that can provide as a model to the larger district. And so aligning all of those procedures and, you know, annual pieces to meet our needs, but then also being able to go back to the district and say, okay, here's the model that we're using. Here's how we're tackling, you know, all of those areas, staffing, you know, so on and so forth. So in short, I think there is some opportunity to be innovative on our side with regard to staffing, but then also still fall in line with the standard procedures that the district would have, i.e. hiring and, you know, what types of forms are needed to fill out and what those processes are. So just wanted to share that.
And I was actually going to volunteer Alex, so I'm glad he I'm glad he spoke up, because he was in our HCM department here in Fort Worth, and now he works for the land. So he does have a very good understanding, clear vision of that area. And so we say in our office all the time, we just kind of joke that we watch the land. We see what they're doing over there to see how we can improve some of our policies possibly. Because we know our partnership with them is going to be very different than a partnership maybe with somebody else, because we just had a good relationship with Texas Wesleyan. And so, yeah, so I'm glad Alex said that, because a lot of times they do come up with different positions they would like to have and different processes for doing things. And so we watch them to see how it works. And then, you know, we can have a discussion to see if that would work for the greater good.
That is so exciting. And that right there is why these partnerships, for many reasons, they're so exciting. It's like, I think we had all hoped that back in the day in the 90s that with subchapter D charters, that there would be more of this sort of migration of good ideas. But so anyway, that was just exciting.
Well, that's why you're working on 18A2s, right?
Exactly.
The purpose of them is that collaboration between learning best practices between charters and districts. So that's a great example. Thank you, Fort Worth and Land, for sharing that.
And just for a moment to pick up on Tracy's comment, it's my hope that policies, rather than having sort of a constraining effect on innovation, could have the opposite. Because if I am, for a moment, like putting my hat on, if I were a district lawyer, a lawyer for the district, I'm going to feel a lot more comfortable about new ideas if it's all written down in a board policy by the partner, and I can see exactly how it's going to play out, so that I know the district is not going to be at risk. So my hope is that we can figure out how to use these policies to open up new possibilities rather than foreclose them.
That resonates with me, and thank you everyone for sharing. I'd add, I think also, don't try very hard not to think of policies as set in stone or like coming down and this is the policy forever. But I think that there's a really great opportunity in every spring or summer to sort of think through all the aspects of operations of the partnership and say, where did things work really well and where were they constrained? And are there ways that policies can help remove those obstacles? Like, I love, Arissa, thank you so much for sharing with the way you tweak the purchasing policies, for an example. And I think that's a great example of, okay, what are we trying to accomplish? We're trying to make sure, just like Christy said, that for the lawyers, that everything is written down and there's clear, you know, protection against fraud or abuse or self-dealing or anything like that. But we're also trying to make sure that the partners can get the things they need in a timely manner. Right. And so let's look at purchasing and our experience over the past year, and, you know, whether it's the district's policy or an independent partner policy, like what has facilitated that and what has been an obstacle. And then there's an opportunity to adjust all the time. And so I think that sometimes it can be difficult in the crush of, even in a normal year, let alone this year, the crush of everything to step back and think about policies. But I actually think it's really worthwhile and can sort of prevent headaches in the future. If you kind of think through, like, what are all the things that caused me aggravation this year, right? Like all the times that Arista and Alex had to hop on the phone and say, oh my gosh, we got to fix this problem. And like, is there a way that we could prevent that from happening if we were sort of more clearly laying out the way that we function as a partnership and the way that we work together?
Okay, Matt, Christine, and Karen, I'm going to hop back on that PowerPoint, okay? Matt, Christy, Karen, let me know who's.
Yeah, I'll jump in. And we've already actually, that was a rich discussion we just had. And so we've already sort of hit on these examples. Go back one more. There you go. Just stay there for just a second. If you, and I'm sorry you have to do this because I don't know how. But thank you. So autonomy we've talked about. Continuity, I think, is just one other kind of dimension is sometimes these partnerships are forged solely or largely on the strength of relationships. And of course, there are contracts in place, but largely it's happening because there's a relationship between the administration of the district and the leadership of the partner. And that is great. And sometimes the only way these partnerships can get off the ground. But if there is a change in leadership at either the district or the operating partner, and the shared understandings of how things are supposed to work are not written down in policies, then I think everybody is kind of at a big disadvantage for trying to recreate why are we doing things this way. It's ultimately not good for students to have that kind of disruption. So even if, and I know it's sometimes a tendency, even when we're negotiating contracts, to say, oh, well, we all are acting in good faith, we'll figure that out later. Sometimes very quickly, it could be that the same folks are no longer involved. So just as another plug for why it's important to have policies in place. And then we've also talked a little bit already about risk mitigation. But I really think it is important for the longevity of this initiative that both reputationally and legally, we get the operational house in order sooner rather than later.
And can I add one thing on there before we go to the development? To Christy's examples, I think also it can give guidance in unfamiliar situations, right? So part of it is reacting to things that have already happened, but I think also when you hit unknown things, if you've been thoughtful about the policy structure, that can be useful. So a real example, this is from a non-Texas project, but there is once the pandemic started, in another partnership in another state, the district passed a new policy on grading, and the partner didn't love that policy, so they wanted to tweak it a little bit. And so the two partners had to go and look at, the partner in the district had to go look at their policy framework and figure out where had they decided that the district had, where the district had control over the policy, and where had the partner reserved the right. And in that case, it turned out that they had said that new policies adopted by the district had to be explicitly also adopted by the partner, which ended up working out for everyone in this case, because the district sort of said, yeah, we understand why you want to do something a little different, but we just want to make sure that we have clarity about how that works. And so when they were setting up that policy framework, nobody was thinking about grading changes brought on in April of a school year because of a pandemic, but it actually, that structure worked reasonably well. You know, it was an interesting test of the structure, like what happens when you're trying to make decisions quickly? How do you signal where those decisions will be made by the partner in consultation with the district versus by the district, and they also affect that, they also apply to the partner. So I just thought that was connected with sort of the autonomy, continuity, risk mitigation. You know, you'll see I probably sound like a broken record, but my plug is that you want to think about what is the overall effect of the policy structure that you have, right? Like, even as it's really important that the specifics of your purchasing policy or your code of conduct or whatever, those specifics matter a lot. But I think also, like, how are you building the kind of partnership? So, you know, I loved what you said, Arista, when you said, you know, we have really good relationships, so we're able to just work it out really well. I think policy should be seen as a means of facilitating that kind of relationship, rather than, I think sometimes it's seen as like a weapon in some places, like the policy is a weapon, like you need to follow this policy, or that's not our policy. In fact, a policy can provide, if it's done right, can provide clarity to everybody so that you understand your roles, responsibilities, and the way that you're going to take action. And I think can help support the kind of real relationships that are what makes a partnership succeed, even more than policy. Right, and Christy, I'm going to throw it back to you, and then Karen, I feel like I've unfairly silenced
Yeah.
But like Christy, because I think you had a good example, Christy, of when there was in terms of where more policy probably would have helped maintain a strong partnership through district leadership. Did you want to say how that
I
story?
think that, no, thank you. No, I just kind of summarized it. I'm good. We can move on to the next.
Okay, great.
Great, and I can jump in here. So I know that there are several folks on this call who have been through this in authorizing or being a partner at least once through one round. So some of these challenges may very well resonate with you. And for those of you that are new at this, some just to keep in mind as you continue to embark on this journey. So this first, when we think about like, what are some of the big challenges around developing policies? We've already begun talking about this first one, this lack of clarity around expectations. And so what this really means is what we have found is that there seems to be a lack of clarity on both the district and the partner side a lot of times as to what is the expectation for what the partner needs to well, first of all, what is that vision in terms of non-negotiables? What does the district have in their mind as far as things such as staffing and different district responsibilities? What is the partner's vision? So sometimes a lack of clarity on that when people are jumping into policies, but then also the lack of clarity around if a partner decides not to adopt certain district policies, whether or not that partner has to go ahead and develop the new policy to replace it by time of authorization. And, Lindsay, please jump in here and correct me if I'm off here, but I don't believe that there's anything that would, prevent a district from receiving benefits if a partner has not supplemented already with the replacement policy. What needs to be laid out is what are the district policies that the partner is adopting, which ones are they choosing not to adopt. And now if a district wants to require that a partner have all of those policies developed at time of authorization, then again, as the authorizer, they are allowed to have that requirement. But so when we think about this, this goes into the second challenge around a lack of time and volume of policies. So what we have seen so often is that because the policies fall as an addendum, it a lot of times can be seen and dealt with almost as like an afterthought. And if you are, we know that a lot of times these negotiations are happening under a real time crunch. And so a partner might decide, I'm going to go ahead and adopt all of the district's policies this first year because I don't have the time to really go in and decide line by line, which are the ones that I want to adopt, which ones do I want to opt out of. And Matt's going to share in a minute kind of some best practices and suggestions for how to go about doing that. So lack of time and then volume of policies. For those of you that have had experience doing this, it can be overwhelming to go to the district website, go to that very formal manual policy page and start diving into all of the policies and reading them. And a lot of times due just to the lack of time and being overwhelmed, that there's not the time and attention that ideally should be placed on thinking through the policies. So I think also a lack of examples. So when we think about, I know that Christy and Empower are working on providing some of those examples so that other partners and districts can have a menu to choose from, and we can start doing a better job of sharing those across districts and across partners. And so I know that what we have found sometimes is that we encourage the partner to have a conversation with the district around perhaps the partner can use a teacher handbook or student code of conduct that they've used in another state or with another district partnership. In the meantime, in the interim, while they, take the time to develop their own policies. A lot of times partners really want to learn more of the local district context. And we all know that unfortunately, as many examples as we can think through and scenarios, sometimes you just don't know what you don't know, and you don't know when you might need a policy in place. And so, like Matt said, we highly encourage there to be to kind of operationalize policies and to refer back to them on a quarterly or at minimum annual basis, to really then decide after the partnership is launched too, where do I want to go back in and tweak and modify and add, and and include the district as part of that conversation. And the last thing I'll say is one of the things that I'm working on with in Midland and in Edgewood is helping the district come up with an operating policy manual, so that we can take these policies and operationalize them. So any that the district, that the partner might be adopting and opting into, really putting down on paper, what does that look like if the partner is going to use the district's food services? Who do they need to contact, to whom? How do you get all of that started? And so if anybody has examples to share, I've started reaching out to a couple of other folks. Please send those my way. And also know that that's something that I'm working on with the Maya team. And as soon as we develop that, we'll certainly share it with the rest of you. And hopefully that can be helpful in this process too.
Wow, that will be hugely helpful, Karen. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely.
Karen, I did have a question. I know there are been certain scenarios where a district has, 300 pages of policies, and it's just, like you said, overwhelming. They don't have enough time. What guidance have you given those partners who are overwhelmed, especially like in the month of December, to just read 300 pages of policies and figure out which ones to pick and choose? Is there a methodology, or start with this chapter, forget the rest and hold it off? Or what kind of train of thought do you have there?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I know Matt might want to add on to this too, when we were talking about this yesterday. So a couple of best practice suggestions I could offer. One is, if you do have a team, that this would be to delegate one person on your team to just lead the policies, or maybe along with a few other responsibilities they have. So I know with one partner, it has been one person's job to be sorting through all of the policies while the rest of the partner negotiations are taking place. So that's one, is thinking about how you can delegate that to somebody. Second of all, what I would suggest doing is, and we've done this in a couple of places like Edgewood, where it's actually, fortunately, fairly easy to go to that policy website on every district website page and copy and paste all of the policy links into like a Google spreadsheet. And then so that the hyperlink is in there. And then Matt had a great example, or a great suggestion to share, that in a column next to that, you could write like a 1-sentence summary of what that policy is all about. But then the hyperlink would be there too, to click on to learn more. And then the second step would be, I would suggest having the partner go through that list of policies, highlight the policies that they do not want to opt into, and then taking that list to the district and having that back and forth conversation to say, here are the ones that we want to adopt. Here are the ones that we're thinking about not adopting. And from what we have found, if a partner doesn't have that alternative policy already developed, just having the rationale to say, this is why I'm deciding not to adopt it. Maybe that's even another column. That's really what the district, I think, a lot of times is looking for. Is I don't have to necessarily know like what your alternative is, but I'd love to learn your thinking behind why you're not wanting to adopt it. So that would be, we have seen that approach work well, but it is something that takes several weeks, if not a couple of months, to really do it thoroughly. Matt or Christy, anything that you'd add to that?
I would just add that it seems daunting to make a spreadsheet like that, but actually, like, I feel like you can get somebody who, like, I feel like there are people who can do that in a day or maybe two, even without a lot of specific expertise, right? Like that's just sort of like reading a bunch of short things and pulling out sort of like a one-sentence summary is something that can, you know, we actually had an intern do it, for example, like, you know, and then I was able to go in and sort of see like, okay, well, are there any places that this doesn't seem right the way that they summarized it, or, you know, double check it. But I think it's really helpful to have that, because then, you know, you asked Bibi also about sort of like prioritization, and I think Karen, you touched on that, but I think also it's going through and being like, does this policy affect the life of our school in a frequent basis, right? Or is it, and I think it's sort of like two checks, like, does it affect the life of our school, and is it just sort of common sense, right? Like there's there's a decent number of policies that are common sense. Like, of course, you're not going to opt out of mandatory reporting, you know, policies and stuff like that. Like, of course, that's just good. That's just smart decision making. And then there's a whole category of things that probably don't actually impact life at the school that much on a daily basis. And so, you know, you may choose to say like, yeah, it's fine for us to do that. But then there's like going to be another set. Sort of once you do that, there's another set, like, okay, now I'm down to 50 policies, 40 policies that like seem to really affect the way we operate. Like, do I feel good about what the district has or not? Right. And I would encourage the district actually to do a similar activity and to say, now that I've sort of prioritized, like, what are the policies that it's most important to me that what they're doing, and are there ones where I feel strongly like what the district is doing is the right way to do it, or are there ones, or on these important ones, am I comfortable with other ways of accomplishing this? Any questions, comments, Christy, if you'd like to add anything, or?
No, I think that was really helpful. And I think, again, I'm going to be the John Lennon to your happy Paul McCartney and say, also, you don't want to get sued. So also, in addition to thinking through what, in terms of your lens of where we want to make sure that we are actually in policy describing what we're doing, there are high risk areas, and I'm going to call out my friend Denise Pierce, who has been by the way, developed policies for TASB and the Charter School Association. You want to, what we're going to be sharing is very much a skeleton, a starter point, but you're going to want to get your attorney, like Denise or another attorney, to whoever you have affiliated with your organization, to make sure that you're looking at these from the perspective of your organization, because really the whole point is that y'all are very unique, and so this is not going to be a one size fits all kind of effort. So as a starting point, we'll be sharing out, again, sort of skeleton kind of policy sets that are intended for y'all to react to and modify as needed. And as you'll see, there's a bunch of boring stuff here about annual audits and uniform grant management standards. And on most of these cases, you're going to, you'll have to follow the district policies because they're federal requirements. But in the interest of having everything in one place, and also for kind of triggering what should be in your operating manual that Karen was talking about, these are all topics that you should think about addressing in your operating manual, because it's not always clear how things are going, how these requirements, even though they're pretty standard requirements, they're going to be operationalized differently for an operating partner than they are for than they are in the district. And so maybe if you'd go back to the previous slide for just a minute. So we're going to start off with some skeleton financial policies, personnel, and special populations policies. And again, I'm looking forward to, these are very much draft as a starting point. I'm very much looking forward to feedback from folks. And then we'll come out soon thereafter with conflicts of interest, student conduct, health and safety. And I know that there were other topics that were raised in the chat that this was very helpful for us to understand kind of what sorts of issues have been thorns in your side in terms of like at least a lack of clarity. So one question, I guess, is in terms of the format, right now we're just thinking about listing out everything that we can think of that you want to address, either in terms of referencing the district policy or including your own policy. But are there other features of a policy set that would be helpful to y'all? I'm not exactly sure what that would be, but maybe some, we might move towards over time, enriching the policy set with considerations that are sort of communally developed, or even, like operator examples kind of thing. But we want this to be sort of a living document. And so we urge you, as when we share the initial set, to be thinking about how can these be better? What might we want to add over time? Other thoughts about anything you've seen as examples that we might want to look at as we're developing these?
Christy, one thought that comes to my mind is kind of back to like the example that Matt shared around like the grading policy, and just in the time of COVID and with scheduling changes and closures and hybrid and reopening. I wonder if, does this list include policies that might capture that category of decisions?
I think, yeah, it does not currently for the first tranches, but I think based on this conversation, I think there are several we should add and maybe even reprioritize a little bit, because that's a good point.
Just thinking, hopefully we won't need all of this in fall of 2021. But yeah. Yeah, pandemic policy.
Yeah, right.
Leah?
Hey, I'm with TCIS. I was just messaging with Karen that I had worked on the Edgewood policies, and that was my first assignment with TCIS, and we had kind of created my job right before the school year started. So it was like, cool, this is all I have to do for the whole month of August. But this is really helpful to hear, because I kind of did that blindly with the guidance. Here's the list of these, here's a spreadsheet, go through and see based on your experiences and what you know and all the laws, like what we should keep and not keep. And what was helpful for us, I just made another column on that sheet to ask questions. And some of it was stuff that I thought maybe it's just me not knowing, but it ended up being really helpful when we met with the CEO and our attorney before they took stuff back to Edgewood, because some of it was just, you know, like, will this be a thing that gets us in trouble down the road, or who is they in this setting? And so it was definitely tedious, but I also think down the road, having one person that did all of that too and knows what those conversations were is proving to be helpful. So this was just very good for me to hear that we did this correctly, and like, good, I will do that in the future also.
Thank you for sharing.
Yes.
I know we're a little over on projected time, but I do want to open the floor up if there's any questions, feedback, topics you'd like us to include in these model policies. Now, granted, we're not about to roll out on Friday every single policy. It doesn't work that way. They will be kind of coming out as they are completed. So bear with us as we go through that process. Christy has been on overdrive the last 2 months getting these done. So if you also want to help support our efforts and join forces, we welcome the help. Believe me, Christy's nodding yes, help me. So we truly appreciate it. But if there's any questions, you have 3 experts here who can definitely answer them.
While you think of your questions, I just add to what BB said. That includes like feedback on the policies as they come out very much, right? Like as they come out, if you read them and say, I think you missed the mark here, we would love to hear that.
Absolutely.
Well, if we don't have any other questions, again, all our policies will be available on our website within the next couple of weeks, hoping to roll out some on Friday, and they will continue, and they'll get updated as we go on. But I just want to thank our panelists, Matt, Christy, and Karen, for carving out some time this week to really educate us on this. This was a complete learning experience for me. In October, I was like, what are you talking about? What is this? So I really appreciate the work they have done, not just on educating the DCA, but myself on this entirely new chapter of partnerships. And again, if there's a topic area that is really relevant to our 1882 partners, we really want to be able to provide an educational session around that. Don't hesitate to reach out to me or even to the team and make a suggestion. We'd love for honest feedback and any sort of ideas. Thank you, everybody, for joining us, and have a great holiday. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Please stay safe and enjoy your holidays.
Bye. Happy holidays.
Thank you. Happy holidays.